So thank you everyone for coming, and also I want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to chat with you about this tool we have recently developed. This CoMent is a tool for the large-scale detection of relationships between biomedical concepts in the scientific literature. Okay, so this is a short overview of the talk. I will start by describing the problem we are trying to solve. It basically is the massive retrieval of relationship between biomedical entities using standardized vocabularies. Then I will describe the methodology we developed, and finally I will show you the web interface of the system where you can look for those relationships. Okay, I think we are not many, so if you have any question at any time, I think you can just raise your virtual hand or open your microphone. Okay, we can discuss it on the fly, and if not, you can ask at the end of the talk. Okay, so this is the introduction. Basically, as you know, biology is now characterized by the accumulation of massive amounts of data. And basically, we as bioinformaticians, what we do is to mine those data in order to obtain knowledge. Okay, and this knowledge can have eventually practical applications for diseases or other things. But mining that massive amount of information requires that information to be represented using ontologies, for example, and standard vocabularies, which are necessary for example, for cross-linking conceptual entities between different resources. Okay, and in general, this is important for representing the information in a way, in a format that can be handled by computers. I mean, just having that information as plain text, for example, is not enough for mining it. And although this is now changing with artificial intelligence and language model and everything, but in principle, you need that information to be represented using standard vocabularies. Okay? For example, if you think on basic processes such as retrieving comprehensively a list of associations between diseases and Go terms and biological processors, or at least a relationship between diseases and the cell types where those diseases are manifesting, those are not trivial. You cannot find that in a resource, okay? So this is why, indeed, we started all this because we needed this kind of linkages for other projects in the lab, and we realized that they were not explicit in any other resource. So we have to develop a system for generating those linkages, okay? So the objective is to develop a system for the massive retrieval of links between biomedical entities from the literature. And this is very important to report those links using standardized vocabularies, okay? That are ontology terms. For sure, you're familiar with ontologies. I will not go into many details. Basically, you can think of an ontology as a way of representing knowledge in a structured way that can be handled by computers. Well, ontologies, in the simple form, they have a set of terms, what we can call it a vocabulary of terms, linked by relationship. But as far as this work is concerned, we are not interested in the structure of the ontology. We're only interested in the set of terms, in the vocabulary, okay? So you can just keep in mind the vocabulary. So for example, this is a term of an ontology designed to represent diseases, human diseases, okay? This is EFO. And this is the term describing, for example, Alzheimer's disease. Basically, among other things, the information you have for this term is the name and different synonyms for different ways of naming this particular disease. And those three blue boxes are terms from a different ontology that is an ontology designed to represent clinical signs of diseases. This is the HPO ontology. And in this case, you have three terms representing three clinical signs that indeed are clinical signs of Alzheimer's disease, okay? plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, and abnormal levels of amyloid, okay? So what we would like to do is to develop a system to automatically find those linkages, to automatically scan the whole set of PubMed entries and detect that this Alzheimer's disease, this term is related to those three terms, for example, okay? The way of doing that is simple. The basic idea is that if two terms are related, I'm talking about relationship in a very broad sense, as we will see later, okay? Then the names and synonyms associated to those terms are going to be co-mentioned in the scientific literature, okay? What I have here, if the terms are related, their names and synonyms will tend to be mentioned together in the scientific abstracts, okay? For example, those are examples of real sentences talking about Alzheimer's disease using different synonyms and the symptoms, the clinical signs of this disease, okay? Well, this is another example. So the important point here is that since we start with a set of ontology terms and we look for conventions of the names and synonyms of those terms, at the end, if we find a significant convention, at the end what you have is a relationship, but the relationship is given in terms of the original IDs, of the original terms in the ontology, okay? And this is important because if your information is linked to a standardized vocabulary, then you can follow up and, for example, link a particular disease to the genes associated to the disease and follow up building a network of relationships you can mine, okay? But the basic idea, the very simple idea is this one, that looking for recurrent convention of two ontology terms, the synonyms can point to generic relationships, and those relationships are reported using standard vocabularies. So this is the methodology. Methodology conceptually is very simple, although, I mean, implementing this in a computer is quite tricky. Basically, we start with a large set of ontology terms from different ontologies. The colors here represent the different ontologies. In the last published version of this system, we have more than 74,000 terms, okay? For a given term, we perform a bibliographic search in PubMed using the name and the synonyms of the term, and we retrieve all articles associated to that terms. For example, for this particular example, for this particular term, we find 82,000 articles talking about this particular term. And the point is that if you do the same for all terms, basically you can think on the results as a large matrix of 40 million, around 40 million PubMed entries, and in this matrix you represent in which particular PubMed entry the term is mentioned, okay? So with this information, you can calculate conventions. You can see how many articles are talking about one of the terms, how many are talking about the other, and the intersection, how many articles are mentioning the two terms together. And with this, you can apply, for example, you can apply a Jaccard score, as Alberto mentioned, or you can just calculate the fraction of articles mentioning the two terms together, and you can also apply a statistical test to evaluate whether this number of articles mentioning the two terms is significant, taking into account the number of articles mentioning the two terms in isolation, and also the size of the full database of PubMed, okay? So with this applying this statistical test, you can evaluate whether your convention is significant or not, okay? And basically, this is what I'm going to show you in a moment, okay? All this information is stored in a database, and you can access it through a web interface. Right now, the public version of the interface, you You can look for relationship between terms in 9 different ontologies related to biomedicine, okay, diseases, Uberon is tissues, cell types, chemical compounds, bacteria, in ontology terms, and HPO, that is an ontology describing clinical science, as I said. Here you have more than 7 million relationships, okay, significant relationship in this database, so you can browse those 7 million relationships between more than 74,000 terms, as I say. Okay. So apart from the relationships that are public in this database, okay, we have applied this this very simple methodology has turned to be very useful for many different things, for many different projects in the lab. For example, I will show you some examples that are published. For example, we also scan the literature for relationship between microorganism diseases, microorganism food modulators, and food modulators and diseases, okay? In the context of a collaboration with Javier Moreno in the CIAL. Another interesting application is to look for relationship between chemical compounds and mesh terms. As you know, mesh is a vocabulary of terms developed at the NCBI, basically for indexing PubMed articles. And okay, it's a very general vocabulary describing many different aspects of things, okay? So if you look for relationship between chemical compounds and mesh terms, basically, this is a way of annotating chemical compounds. You annotate a given chemical compound with different terms of this vocabulary. And this can be used, for example, for enrichment analysis, for performing enrichment analysis of metabolomic data using this vocabulary, okay? In general, when you want to perform enrichment analysis, you need a vocabulary of and annotations. And we incorporate this in the system we have developed for the functional enrichment analysis of metabolomic data. Okay, this is like a set of infer annotations. Also, we apply to look for relationship between drugs and clinical signs. Okay, here you have HPR terms that are clinical signs and different chemical compounds. And this, for example, is representing side effect of drugs, or also intended effects of drugs. Okay, this also has been done in the context of a collaboration with Juan Antonio Garcia and his group at the University of Malaga. I want to recall that obviously here you are not going to have new relationships. You are not going to discover new compounds, okay, or anything like that. This is a way just of retrieving the information that is already there, that is already known, and retrieve this information using a standard vocabulary, standard terms, so that you can follow up and now connect those, for example, those HPO terms, you can connect them to the diseases associated to them and so on, okay? Another interesting application is, for example, to look for the symptoms, again, the HPO terms associated to allergenic proteins, okay? And with this, we generated the first resource with a comprehensive annotation of the symptoms of allergenic substances, okay? And for example, another application is to look for relationship between cell types and clinical signs, okay? And this is part of this other publication. And so the conclusions so far is that we have developed a system that can automatically retrieve links between biomedical concepts by looking for significant conventions in the scientific literature. This is what I mentioned before. It is important to take into account that with this, you are not going to discover, in principle, I will show you later some other follow-up of this, but in principle, with the system we have developed so far, you cannot discover new or unknown relationship, okay? You just retrieve previously known relationship, but using standard vocabularies. And an advantage of this system is that, in principle, you can apply to any set of terms. It can be an ontology or not. You can apply to any set of terms. The only thing you need is a name for the term, and obviously, if you have also synonyms, you can leverage that information. But if you don't have the synonyms with the name, is in principle enough for making the bibliographic searches. Okay. Well, many of the sometimes some of the types of relationship we have generated are available in other resources, leaving apart differences in coverage, methodology, and so on. But others are novel. For example, as I said, you cannot find any resource with a comprehensive list of relationship between diseases and for example, the biological processes associated underlying those diseases. Okay. Or the relationship between diseases and tissues and diseases and cell types. I mean, those things that look very important for performing any bioinformatic study of the landscape of the human diseases, for example, but those links are not explicit anywhere using standard vocabularies. Okay, so this is why we generate them. Okay, problems. Basically, the main problem is that the relationships you are obtaining are generic relationships. Okay, you don't have any information on the quality of the relationship. You don't know why two terms are related. In principle, you know nothing about the meaning of the relationship, neither the directionality, and also you cannot distinguish positive from negative relationships. Okay, you have some examples here. Okay, I can show you some other examples in detail if you are interested. But depending on the type of relationship you are interested in, those can be very important problems or not. Okay, for some types of relationship, the meaning of the relationship is clear, while for others, not being able to distinguish different types of relationships or not being able to distinguish whether the relationship is positive or negative could be a problem. Okay. And also there are problems with names and synonyms in the original resources. If you have some problem with that in the original resource, basically you take that problem to the bibliographic searches and to the final results. Okay. And I also have some examples if you are interested. Okay, so what else for the future? Obviously, as you might imagine, the future in this field, in mining, in text mining in general, are artificial intelligence and large language model. And in collaboration with the group of Juan Antonio García Rané and Pedro Sean in Malaga, we already have some results applying language models to this problem. You can apply language models to many different aspects of the problem. But for example, one thing that is working quite well is to look for relationship between the description of the terms and the abstract, the PubMed abstracts, looking for using embedding spaces. Okay, again, if you are interested, I can give you more details. And this is a sort of substitution for the bibliographic searches. Okay, and the results are very, very good, are very promising. And obviously, another obvious application of language model to this is to obtain information on the relationship. Okay, once you obtain the relationship, you can ask, for example, to a chatbot why a given pair of terms are related. Okay, but another thing we are starting to explore now, and I think this is going to be very promising for the future, is to mine the conventional network. Okay, Alberto already mentioned the different methodologies for mining complex networks. For example, looking for clusters. Okay, in general, clusters in network represent groups of nodes that have some common feature. Okay, so this is a possible way of mining this network, because basically at the end, if you think about it, what you have here is a large network where the nodes are the biomedical terms and the relationship And you have those generic relationships between biomedical terms. And if you zoom in a region of the network, you will find, for example, relationship between diseases and clinical signs. And those relationships can be interpreted, okay? Because as I said, this produces general relationships. You have to interpret them a posteriori. In this case, the interpretation could be that the disease has a particular set of symptoms. You also have a relationship between biological processes and Go terms in general, also molecular functions and everything. Relationship between Go terms and diseases and clinical signs. In this case, the relationship can be interpreted as this disease is related to a given biological process. I mean, a malfunctioning, for example, of that biological process is behind the disease or whatever. And you can go on. Obviously, you can also add to this network links that are already in other resources. For example, relationship between diseases and proteins, okay? And so here you have a very rich network, for sure, meaning this network you can obtain important biological information, and this is what we are starting to do right now, okay, to mine this network in different ways. One thing we started to do is to predict new links, for example, okay? There is a whole field in network analysis that is link prediction in networks. Basically, they use quite intuitive concepts. For example, if two nodes in the network are not linked, but they have a lot of links in common with other nodes, you can think that those two nodes are also related. So this is a way of predicting new links. So in this way, we can use this information to predict really links between biomedical terms that are not described in the literature so far. Okay, and we have some preliminary results on that, and it looks promising. I mean, we obtain links. It is difficult to evaluate that because those links are not described in the literature, but if you think about it, they make sense, okay? So in this way, for example, you can predict a link between a disease and a biological process, even this link has not been described before in the literature. If the disease and the biological process are linked to common set of entities, symptoms, chemical compounds, cell types, you can infer that probably there is some relationship between them, okay? And also this can be a way of inferring the meaning of a link. That was another problem of the method. As I told you, the relationships are generic. It tells you nothing about the meaning of the relationship. But for example, you can think that a relationship between an HPO term, clinical sign, and a cell type, the meaning is different if this relationship, if those terms are linked to many chemical compounds in common, or if the two terms are linked to many biological processes in common, okay? Maybe the meaning of those two links are different. So we think that we can use this to also to give a meaning or even a directionality to the links. Okay, and that's all. I want to acknowledge the people who participate in different parts of this project. Jorge Novoa developed a large part of those systems, including the web interface I'm going to show you. Okay, Monica Chagoyen, who's now at the Instituto Cajal, she also participates in those development. Okay, as I said, we have a collaboration with the group of Juan Ranea in Malaga for developing those systems. Now they are starting to apply artificial intelligence to this problem. And also Jose Cordova, who was in Juan's group and now he's in the CENIO, he set up a local version of this system because as so far we do the bibliographic searches using the app API of the NCBI, and this is not very, as you might imagine, is not very efficient. So now Jose set up a local version of the system that can be run locally using a local copy of the whole PubMed, okay? And also, in collaboration with Javier Moreno and Antonio Fernandez Dumont, we are applying the system to different aspects related with allergenicity and microbiome and other things. and the institution who provide money at some point to this. That's it. I don't know if it is better if I show you the system now and we leave the questions to the end, or if you have any question right now. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this is the web interface of the system. Can you see it? Yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So basically we try to keep the interface minimalistic and simple and intuitive. Okay. Basically what you have here is the representation of the 9 ontologies I told you. Okay. And the links between the ontologies, meaning that for this particular pair we have pairs we have relationship between terms of those two ontologies. Okay. Even if in this interface you only have the pairs that are, for which you have lines here. Right now we have calculation for most of the pairs. Okay, so if you are interested in a particular set of relationship that is not here, for example, like you are interested in relationship between Euberon terms that are tissues and chemical compounds, for example, if you are interested in this relationship between tissues and chemical compounds, you can ask us, because for sure it is already calculated, even if it is not here. Okay, so basically, well, you have also a help file and a tutorial. Okay, you can follow to get familiar with the interface, with how it works. This is basically what we are going to do to follow the tutorial. Basically, if you are interested in a particular term of one of the ontologies and you want to retrieve relationship for that term, you have to look for that term. For example, imagine we are interested in Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so this is a term of this disease ontology. If you start typing, you obtain a list of possibilities. Okay, as you see, there are many terms in this ontology representing different forms of the disease or different variants of the disease. If you find the term you are interested in here in this list, you just select it. If not, you press enter and you obtain a more detailed list, including not only the name of the term, but also the synonyms. So you can inspect the synonyms and locate the term you are interested in. You can also follow the link to the original ontology for the terms in order to obtain more information on that particular term. Okay, and once you know the term you are interested in, for example, we are interested in the generic Alzheimer's disease, not any of the variants, you just select it. Okay, and after selecting the term or terms, you can select more than one in the previous form if you are interested. You just look for the relationship you are interested in. Okay, for example, in this case, we are interested in the links between Alzheimer's and clinical signs, HPO, biological process associated to the disease, and chemical compounds, for example, and also cell types associated to the disease. Okay, so once you have the term selected and the set of relationships you are interested in, you just press search. Okay, and you obtain a list with all the relationships. In this case, we found close to 2,000 relationships between Alzheimer's disease and the terms of those other 4 ontologies. Okay, for each relationship, you have the 2 terms, and you have also the links to the original resource. Okay, you also have this is important, the string similarity parameter. Basically, this tells you how similar are the textual description of the 2 terms, because, for example, here, the first relationship is a trivial one between Alzheimer's disease in the disease ontology and Alzheimer's disease in HPO, because I don't know why, but Alzheimer's disease is also annotated as a symptom, as a clinical sign in HPO, okay? So since the description of the two terms is almost identical, okay, this also takes into account the synonyms, okay? Since the description is almost identical, you obtain an obvious convention, okay? And this parameter tells you that, indeed it is in red color, tells you that this convention could be artifactual due to the very similar textual description of the two terms, okay? You can, here in the columns, you have text boxes for restricting the values, okay? For restricting the values that, and for example, if you, and here you can only obtain the pairs with string similarity lower than a given value in order to remove those cases, okay? Also, you can sort the columns. You can sort the list by any parameter, just clicking in the header of the column, okay? Basically, what you have here is the number of papers mentioning one of the terms, okay? The number of papers mentioning the other term, and the number of papers mentioning the two terms together. And this is the fraction of terms mentioning the two terms together. Here you can also use the Jaccard score or any other parameter. And this is the p-value of the hypergeometric text I mentioned before. Okay. So as you can see here, this gives you a nice picture of the biological processes and cell types associated to Alzheimer, and also the chemical compounds associated to the disease. As you can see, those are compounds that are used to treat the disease, and the biological processes you see are the typical biological processes behind the disease, metabolic processes of beta amyloid and so on. Also, the symptoms are the typical symptoms of Alzheimer. Okay. If you want to restrict to a particular set of relationships, for example, imagine you are interested only in the relationship between with cell types, okay? So you remove the other lines and you press search again, and now your list is restricted to relationship between Alzheimer and cell type. And here this column is very interesting for researching a given relationship, for going into it. For example, imagine you are interested in this particular relationship between Alzheimer's disease and cholinergic neuron. Here, this G is a direct link to Google, to perform in Google the search of these two terms together, okay? Okay, so basically it's just a link with the two search terms together, and you can see that you obtain in Google, you can see information on explaining the relationship between Alzheimer's disease and this particular cell type. Okay, and you can do the same for performing the search in PubMed, the piece for performing the same search in PubMed. And for the number of papers in common, you see that the link is active, and if you click it, you obtain the actual list of papers in common. Let's see if it works. Well, basically, you would obtain a list of here you have. Those are the 36 papers mentioning Alzheimer's disease and, in this case, culture cell, and you can go to any of them to read the text and see and obtain more information on this particular relationship. And you also have here a link to export the table in TSV format to further process it locally or whatever. And this is basically what you can do with the web interface. So I guess I will stop here. I don't know if I am on time, but this is all. And if you have any question, I will be very happy to discuss it with you.